And if you have any question about what John Kerry's made of, just spend 3 minutes with the men who served with him 30 years.
During the 2004 presidential election, John Kerry's campaign was rocked by an organization calling themselves Swift Boat Veterans for Truth. They released advertisements destroying John Kerry's record as a soldier. In the end, most of the ads were discredited, but by then the damage had been done. Our words have consequences.
I have people skills. I am good at dealing with people.
What we've got here is failure to communicate.
It depends upon what the meaning of the word is. Yes.
It's time to be serious now. As speakers, we have a grave responsibility. When we are holding an audience at attention, we have the responsibility of telling the audience the truth and of keeping that reality. In this lecture, we are going to talk about what it means to be an ethical communicator. And in particular, we're going to look at three things. We're going to define the role of ethics in writing and delivering effective public speeches. We're going to identify methods to write and deliver a public speech within appropriate ethical guidelines, and we're going to explain the value of ethical communication for public speakers. By the end of this lecture, you should be able to do all three of those things. So let's get started. Ethics is a funny word. We use it, we throw it around a lot. We talk about being ethical, we talk about being right, we talk about being a good person. But when it comes to public speaking, ethics comes down to three things. It comes down to the language that we use, the content in our speech, and the attribution that we give to the content and to our language. Let's take each of those individually, starting first with the language that we use. Language is a vital part of a speech. It's essential that we consider what we are saying and how we're saying it. When it comes to the ethical aspects of language, that means learning about our audience, and which means thinking about who our audience is, what they know, and what it means to talk to them as ethical individuals. The next part of language, though, is using language that's appropriate to yourself, and to the audience, and to the occasion. So thinking about public speaking as relevant to yourself, your audience, and the occasion, that's in terms of choosing your topic and creating your speech. As we're choosing our language, we need to choose words that are appropriate for ourselves. There are some words that we can't say because of who we are, because of where we are. Some of those words might be racially charged. Some of those words might simply be professionally charged. If I'm not an expert in a topic, I probably shouldn't be using those words. One example I'll give you is I love watching The People's Court. I know, guilty pleasure. Just leave me alone, all right? It always makes me laugh when people get on there and try to use words that are much bigger than they have the ability to use. It never ends well, and it only makes them look ignorant. If we don't know how to use a word, we need to avoid using that word. Likewise, we need to consider the words that how our audience will receive those words. There might be words that we can use around other people, but when we get into an audience of a specific, of one group or another, it may be less acceptable to use some of those words. Being an ethical communicator means respecting our audience and respecting what they want to hear. And then the occasion. There are times when it's okay to use profanity. There are times when it's not. And being an ethical communicator means recognizing the difference between the two. So language is the first part of ethics of public speaking. The next part, though, is content. And when we talk about content, there are two very important factors that we have to consider. The first is accuracy, and the second is support. As we consider the content that we are using in our speech, we have to use accurate content, and we have to support that content from credible sources. Let's first start talking about accuracy. There are a couple of ways that we can be unethical in the accuracy of our statements. There's sins of commission and sins of omission. Meaning, we can lie knowing that we are lying, or report information that we know to be untrue, a la, that depends on what the meaning of the word is. Or we can commit sins of omission, where we give people information knowing that we aren't giving them the entire picture. For example, during the presidential campaign, Donald Trump cited statistics from the Bureau of Labor and Statistics that suggested that 58% of African Americans were unemployed. While this fact is on paper true, the number that he cited included children, students, individual mothers at home, people who were choosing to be unemployed, not people who were unemployed as we have it as the standard definition that we use. So the first part of our content is ethical content is accuracy. The second part is support. And support means looking at existing evidence. Is there existing evidence? When we say something, is there actually evidence out there that supports what we have to say? So make sure that whatever you're saying has proof. But be careful. I'm going to show you some proof. The tweets that you're seeing now are from Neil deGrasse Tyson, who's an astrophysicist and an all-around pretty spectacularly awesome guy. These are in response to this young girl, Liza, who talked about how awesome it would be to live on Jupiter. The tweet, Tyson was criticized then for posting these tweets. They weren't his. Tyson's too spectacularly awesome to insult a young girl like this. Instead, they were tweets that came from the popular news site Clickhole, run by The Onion. Make sure that whatever source you have is a reliable source. Just because The Onion says it doesn't mean it's true. In fact, if The Onion says it, it probably isn't true. But hey, that doesn't stop too many people from sharing it on Facebook. Whatever support you use, make sure there's proof somewhere, and then make sure that the proof is from a reliable source. Our last element is attribution. I'm sure you've all had lectures in your English classes about what it means to give a source attribution. You probably have spent many, many late nights puzzling over how to cite something appropriately in APA or MLA or Chicago or whatever. I know you've gone crazy over it, but attribution is absolutely vital. As you consider your attribution, make sure that whatever you're citing is attributed to the correct source, so it's accurate, and make sure that the source you're citing is actually credible. Here's a great story. There was a meme floating around Facebook for a while. Some of you might be Harry Potter fans and might have seen this. Dumbledore telling people do or do not. There is no try. What a wonderful quote. Unfortunately, it wasn't Dumbledore. It was Yoda. Do or do not. There is no try. If you I can, yes. Yes, I cannot do a Yoda impression. But I love Yoda. Yoda's awesome. And Yoda said it. Not Dumbledore. Make sure that you're giving credit to the right source, the right place. But then, on top of that, and this is where things get a little bit complicated, make sure that your source is credible. There are hundreds of thousands of news sources. The reason that I said this gets sticky is because you might think a source is credible, and your audience might not. That means you need to approach that source with some skepticism and potentially find other places. For example, one of my favorite news sources is the Christian Science Monitor. People who study news know that the Monitor is one of the most highly respected news organizations in the world. However, most people who hear Christian Science Monitor, if they aren't familiar with the publication, they might think that it's a religious publication. And It's not. It's a world-renowned newspaper that provides high-quality, non-biased perspectives on world events. But the name of it might cause your audience to question where it comes from. What you see on your screen right now, though, are a number of different sources. Many of them have expertise in very specific areas. For example, guns and ammo. You're talking about guns, you're gonna find some good information there. It might be a little biased, but it should be relatively accurate. Same thing with the New York Times. That it's a highly respected publication, but some people see it as not reliable or biased. Make sure that you respect your audience enough to present your information with sources that your audience will also find reliable. And that takes us back to the two parts of attribution that are absolutely vital: accuracy and credibility. Make sure you cite the right source, and make sure that source is viewed as credible. And that brings us back full circle. Ethics are a vital part of communicating, of public speaking, of writing, of sharing your ideas. We need more ethical communicators in the world. We need people who are willing to use respectful language. We need people who are willing to do the work and find support for their content. And we need people who know where that information came from. That's what it means to be an ethical communicator. And that's what I'm challenging you to do. You should now be able to define the role of ethics in writing and delivering effective public speaking. You should be able to identify methods to write and deliver a public speech within appropriate ethical guidelines, and you should be able to explain the value of ethical communication for public speakers. And that's what it means to be an ethical public speaker. I challenge you to take what we've talked about here today and put it into practice, not just in this class, not just in writing speeches, not just in writing papers, but in everything that we do. We need more people who know what they're talking about and can back it up with facts. I'm not going to go so far as to say John Kerry lost his presidential bid because of an advertising campaign. I will, however, stand by the fact that his reputation was destroyed because a few people put forward information that was later shown to be patently false. No one should ever suffer that. Go out in the world and be ethical. I'm going to see you on the flip side.